Welcome to our deep dive into durable carbon dioxide removal. Pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere or locking it away for good. We'll be focusing on the 2024 year in review from CDR.fyi. They're really the leading resource for everything CDR. And honestly, this report is just packed with insights. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a really good grasp of the major trends shaping the whole CDR market, the growth, the players, and what it all means for the future. And I gotta say, some of these findings were really surprising even to me. And I follow this stuff pretty closely. For example, the durable CDR market grew by a whopping 78% in 2024.
That's right, a full 78%. It's really an impressive growth rate, especially for such a young industry. We're talking about almost 8 million tons of CDR purchased. That's a really significant jump from the previous year.
Okay, so huge growth. That's fantastic. But I'm guessing there's a little more to the story, right? 78% growth sounds almost too good to be true. What's the catch?
Well, the catch is that a significant chunk of that growth, over 75% actually, is coming from just a few buyers, Microsoft, Google, and Frontier. Now, Frontier is a bit different. They're an organization that pools buying power from a bunch of different companies, like Stripe, Shopify, McKinsey, to name a few. But it still means that a relatively small number of companies are driving most of the demand.
I see what you're getting at. So it's great that these companies are stepping up and putting their money where their mouth is on carbon removal. But if any of them were to suddenly change their strategy, the whole market could feel it, right?
Exactly. Put it this way. Imagine the solar panel market if like 75% of purchases were coming from one or two huge corporations. That's a lot of eggs in very few baskets. It makes the market pretty vulnerable. We saw this happen in the early days of the electric vehicle market. When government subsidies for EVs were suddenly reduced in some countries, sales totally plummeted. And a lot of promising startups went under. We definitely don't want to see that happen with the CDR market.
All right, so we need to see a much broader base of buyers if we want the CDR market to really thrive and become resilient. Makes sense. But what about the actual carbon removal work? Is that keeping pace with all of these purchases?
That's the other key piece of the puzzle. And the answer is, well, it's complicated. Deliveries also increased a lot last year, up 120%, reaching 318.6 thousand tons. But that's still only 4.4% of the total amount purchased.
Wow. So lots of promises. But the actual CO2 being removed is still just a tiny fraction of what's been committed. What's causing that gap?
A few things. Some of it is just the nature of these projects. You're often talking about building these large facilities, using new technologies, and that takes time. There's also permitting issues, supply chain bottlenecks, and sometimes pushback from local communities. But it does highlight the need for suppliers to actually demonstrate that they can deliver and that they can scale their operations quickly to meet that growing demand.
Okay, so delivery is lagging behind a bit, but at least investments are flowing in to help these companies scale up right. Actually, the report mentioned a bit of a slowdown in investments in 2024. Should we be worried?
It's not quite as bad as it looks. We have to look at it in context. Remember back in 2022 and 2023, there were those massive investment deals in CDR, like Stripe's billion-dollar advanced market commitment and the launch of Frontier. Those deals kind of threw off the numbers a bit, so 2024 looks like a drop-off, when really the number of startups getting funded actually went up.
So investors are getting more strategic now. It's not just about throwing money at every new CDR idea. They want to see real results.
Precisely. They're starting to ask the tough questions. Can this technology actually scale? What are the true costs? Are there any hidden risks? They're looking for companies with a solid plan, a strong team, and most importantly, evidence that their technology can really deliver. Think of it like the early internet days. Any company with .com in its name could get millions. But as the market matured, investors got way more selective, and that's what we're seeing with CDR now.
Survival of the fittest. Only the companies that get results will get the funding they need to grow. That makes sense. The report did highlight some interesting new players entering the market, though, right?
Yeah, we're seeing new entrants on both the buyer and supplier sides. Large corporations like Equinor and Skies 50 are making big commitments to purchase CDR, which is really encouraging. And there are also some fascinating startups coming up on the supplier side, companies like Terra.co280 and Gigablue, each with their own unique take on carbon removal.
So while we're seeing concentration on the buyer side, the supplier side seems to be full of activity and innovation. That's got to be a good sign, right?
It is, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. The reality is there are still way more suppliers than buyers. The report found that only about 36% of listed suppliers have actually made a sale. Competition is fierce, and that leads to another big issue, the risk of a price war.
Ooh, price wars. Those never end well. How is this playing out in the CDR market?
Imagine you're a startup. You have this amazing, cutting-edge CDR technology. You've got a great team, a really promising approach, but you're still early stage. And your costs are relatively high. Now you're competing for this limited pool of buyers. And some of those buyers are really focused on price. What do? Do you stick to your guns and risk losing to a competitor who's willing to undercut you? Or do you lower your prices even if it means losing money just to make a foothold in the market? It's a tough situation.
It's a classic catch-22. You need funding to scale and bring costs down. But to get funding, you need contracts. And to get contracts, you might have to sacrifice your profit margins. And if everyone starts slashing prices, won't that stifle innovation? Those companies with groundbreaking but maybe more expensive technologies might not make it.
Exactly. And the report suggests that this problem could get even worse because the next wave of buyers are likely to be even more price conscious, putting even more pressure on these early stage companies. This is where government policies can really make a difference.
Like how?
We'll take the US 45Q tax credit. It's been super important in supporting direct air capture technology, which is notoriously expensive early on. The 45Q credit provides a financial incentive for companies to invest in and use DAC, even if it's not the cheapest option right now.
So well-crafted policies can help level the playing field, giving those promising but expensive technologies a chance to prove themselves and eventually bring costs down. Sounds like governments have a big role to play in shaping the future of CDR. Speaking of shaping the future, there's a lot of talk about the new Science-Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI, the updated net zero standard that's supposed to come out soon. This is a big deal, right?
It could be huge. The SBTI sets the standard for how companies set net zero targets, and right now companies don't get much credit for buying CDR. Now imagine if the new standard makes it mandatory, that a certain percentage of a company's emissions reductions have to come from CDR purchases. That would totally change the game.
It would be like flipping a switch. Suddenly CDR goes from a nice-to-have to a must-have. For any company that's serious about getting to net zero, that would create a massive surge in demand, wouldn't it?
It would be transformative. It could take the CDR market from millions of tons to billions of tons pretty quickly.
Wow. So given all of this, the rapid growth, the challenges, these potential policy shifts, what should CDR companies be focusing on right now if they want to be successful in this changing landscape?
The report gives some really good advice. First and foremost, a relentless focus on cost reduction. That's the key in a market where price is such a big factor. And for companies that can, exploring other ways to generate revenue from co-products.
Co-products, like what? Can you give me an example?
Sure, take biochar. It's a byproduct of some carbon removal methods, and it can be used to improve soil health and crop yields. So a CDR company that produces biochar could sell it to farmers, generating more income and making their whole operation more sustainable.
So it's not just about removing carbon, it's about building businesses that can really make a difference on multiple fronts.
Exactly. It's about creating a positive feedback loop where carbon removal is part of a larger system of sustainability. That's what's going to drive long-term success.
This has been so insightful. I bet our listeners are already picking up some valuable info. Now let's look at some of the specific trends that CDR.fyi highlights in their report.
Sounds good. There's a lot to dig into there. Welcome back. Let's dive into some of the more specific data from the CDR.fyi report. One thing that really stood out to me was the data on purchaser concentration. Like we talked about earlier, just a handful of major players are driving a big chunk of the demand. And the report actually flags this as a potential risk. Like, what happens if these big companies change their minds?
Yeah, it does make you wonder what would happen if, say, Microsoft suddenly decided to stop buying CDR or switch to a totally different approach. I mean, the impact on suppliers who are depending on those contracts could be huge, right? It just shows how important it is to have lots of different types of buyers, not just for different carbon removal technologies, but also for the stability of the whole market.
Absolutely. A healthy CDR market needs a wide range of buyers. Big corporations, smaller companies, even individuals. That's how you create stability and resilience. Speaking of diversity, the report also looks at purchasing trends for different CDR methods, and some interesting patterns are emerging. For example, we're seeing a pretty clear shift toward larger scale purchases, especially for methods like the bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS.
BECCS, that's the one where you grow plants that absorb CO2, and you burn them for energy and capture the emissions underground, right? It seems like a pretty cool approach, with a lot of potential to remove carbon, but I imagine it's got its own challenges too.
Right. BECCS isn't a perfect solution. One of the biggest hurdles is making sure there's enough biomass. You don't want to end up clearing forests or anything like that just to grow energy crops. And the cost of building those BECCS facilities can be pretty high. But the good news is we are seeing those bigger companies making those long-term investments, which suggests they're getting more confident in BECCS as a real solution.
It seems like the whole CDR market is still in this experimental phase, where everyone's trying different things and seeing what works. It's too early to tell which approaches will win out in the end. Speaking of different approaches, the report also talks about direct air capture, or DAC, as a really fast-growing segment. It's one of those technologies that just seems futuristic, giant machines that literally suck CO2 right out of the air. What's driving that growth?
Well, DAC has some big advantages. First, it's really versatile. You can pretty much put it anywhere, unlike some other methods that need specific geology or access to biomass. Second, the carbon removal is super easy to verify. You know exactly how much CO2 you're capturing and storing. That's appealing to buyers who want to be sure their investment is making a real difference.
But DAC has also been criticized for using a lot of energy and being expensive. Is that changing?
It is. DAC is still pretty new and the costs are high, but they're coming down steadily. As the technology gets better and economies of scale kick in, we can expect those costs to keep dropping, and there's a lot of work being done to make DAC more energy efficient, like using renewable energy to power those big air-sucking machines.
It's almost like a race. We need to scale up these solutions fast to deal with climate change, but we also need to make sure they're sustainable and affordable in the long run. It's a tough balance.
It is, and it's not just about the tech itself, it's about the whole ecosystem that supports the CDR market. The report actually dives into this a bit, highlighting the growing importance of service providers.
Service providers, who are those? What do they do?
Think of them as the behind-the-scenes players. They're the ones who connect buyers and sellers, help structure deals, verify those carbon removal claims, all sorts of essential services.
So like the matchmakers, the accountants, the quality control people of the CDR world?
Exactly. They make sure the whole system is working smoothly and transparently. And their role is getting even more important as the market grows and gets more complex.
Can you give some specific examples of the types of service providers out there?
Sure. There are companies like Pachama and Solvera. They use satellite images and AI to verify the carbon being stored in forests. Then you have registries like Verra and Gold Standard. They issue and track carbon credits. And there are marketplaces like Puro.earth and Carbon Future, connecting buyers and sellers of CDR, and many more.
It's like a whole industry in itself. It makes sense that as the CDR market matures, we see more specialization and different services popping up. But with all these players, is there a risk of things getting too fragmented?
That's a good question. There's a lot of discussion right now about needing more standardization and making sure different platforms and methods can work together smoothly. So carbon credits can be traded easily, and buyers can compare different options fairly.
It sounds like there's still a lot of work to do to make sure the CDR market is transparent, credible, and actually effective in fighting climate change.
Absolutely, and that brings us to another important point that the report makes. Financial sustainability, not just for individual companies, but for the whole CDR market.
What does that mean practically? How do we make the CDR market financially sustainable?
It means moving away from relying on government help or charity and creating a market that can stand on its own. That means CDR companies need to operate like real businesses, bringing in revenue, managing costs, and showing they can be profitable.
That sounds pretty challenging, especially for companies in a market that's still so new and experimental. What are some strategies they can use to achieve that financial sustainability?
Well, we've already mentioned a few, like focusing on costs and finding new revenue streams from those co-products. But they also need to think strategically about their place in the market and how they're different. Not all CDR buyers are the same. Some are happy to pay more for high-quality verified carbon removal, while others just want the cheapest option.
So it's about knowing who you're selling to, understanding their needs, and adapting your offerings accordingly, just like any other business, really.
Exactly, and it's about playing the long game. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It takes commitment to build a sustainable business, one that can handle the ups and downs of the market, and actually make a difference for the climate over the long term.
Makes sense. The report also looked at some of the geographic trends in the CDR market. Anything interesting to note there?
Yeah, one of the most striking trends is that different regions are starting to play different roles. For instance, North America is really dominating as the buyer of CDR. While Europe is more of a hub for suppliers, it's creating this interesting flow of carbon removal across the Atlantic.
Like a global carbon trading network, with different regions specializing in different parts of the CDR value chain?
Exactly. And within those regions, we're also seeing specialization in specific CDR methods. For example, the U.S., with its 45Q tax credit, is becoming a leader in direct air capture, while Europe, especially countries like Sweden and Denmark, with their forestry and bioenergy industries, are focusing more on BECCS.
So this geographic specialization could actually be a good thing. It lets different regions play to their strengths and resources.
Exactly. It's like a global laboratory for CDR, where each region is experimenting with different approaches and sharing what they learn. That kind of collaboration is essential if we're going to scale up CDR to the level we need to really tackle climate change.
Speaking of scaling up, the report doesn't shy away from the financial side of things. what's the state of investment in the CDR market right now?
Well, overall investment in CDR is still pretty small, especially compared to the size of the climate problem, but it is growing steadily, and more importantly, we're seeing more diverse funding sources. In the early days, it was mostly philanthropic groups and government grants. Now we're seeing venture capital, private equity, even big corporations investing in CDR.
That's a good sign, right? It means CDR is becoming a more mainstream investment opportunity.
Definitely. And it's not just about how much money is coming in, but also who's investing and why. Like I said, investors are getting more careful. They're looking for companies with good business models, proven technologies, and strong teams. They want investments that make money and help the climate.
It sounds like the CDR market is maturing, moving beyond the hype and getting more focused on results.
I think that's a good way to put it. And one area where we really need that maturity is in how CDR companies talk about themselves and their work.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more. What's wrong with how they're communicating?
Well, especially with newer companies, there's this tendency to overpromise and underdeliver, or to use lots of technical jargon that's hard to understand that can create confusion and skepticism among potential buyers who are already trying to navigate this complex and unfamiliar market.
So it's about being clear, transparent, and honest about what CDR can and can't do, using language that everyone can understand.
Exactly. Less marketing hype, more honest, data-driven communication. It's about building trust with buyers and the public.
And building trust also means making sure the carbon removal claims are accurate and can be verified, which brings us to the whole issue of standardization and verification in the CDR market.
Right. That's another key area where the report highlights the need for more progress. Buyers need to be confident that the CDR they're paying for is actually removing carbon, and that those claims have been carefully checked by independent experts.
So it's about making sure everyone is playing by the same rules. And there are clear ways to measure, report, and verify those carbon removal claims.
Exactly. And while there are groups working on developing those standards, there's still a lot to do to harmonize different approaches and create a really solid and transparent verification system for the whole CDR market.
It's exciting to see how far we've come in such a short time, but it's also a little overwhelming to realize how much more needs to be done to really make CDR a core part of solving climate change.
I agree. There's no question that the CDR market is at a crucial point, facing both big challenges and incredible opportunities.
We've covered a lot of ground today. Should we take a quick break and then come back to talk about what's next for the CDR market in 2025 and beyond?
So where do we go from here? What does the future hold for CDR?
Yeah, that's the big question. We've seen incredible growth. We've talked about the challenges, explored the complexities. But what's next?
Well, the next few years are going to be really important for deciding whether CDR can really live up to the hype and be a major climate solution. One of the biggest questions is whether demand will catch up with all this new supply.
Right, it does seem like there's a bit of a gap there. Lots of companies creating CDR solutions, but not enough buyers. Is that a problem?
It could be. If you have too many suppliers and not enough buyers, it can lead to a race to the bottom on price. And that could actually push out some of the companies with really promising but more expensive technologies.
That would be a huge loss, wouldn't it, to see innovation stifled just because of market forces? What can we do to prevent that?
Well, policymakers have a role to play for sure. The report talks about that. It's about creating incentives that reward high-quality, long-lasting carbon removal, not just the cheapest option.
So we need to think about more than just the price per ton of CO2 removed. We need to consider how long that removal lasts, any extra benefits, and the overall sustainability of the approach.
Exactly. And buyers need to be part of the solution, too. They need to be willing to pay a bit more for those better solutions, understanding that investing in CDR now is really an investment in a safer future for everyone.
It's about changing the way we think about CDR, isn't it? It's not just another thing to buy. It's a crucial part of solving climate change.
Absolutely. And that's why transparency and standardization are so important. If we want buyers to feel good about investing in CDR, they need to know that the claims being made are accurate, verifiable, and comparable.
It all comes down to trust. And that means having clear standards for measuring, reporting, and verifying carbon removal.
Exactly. Standards that everyone agrees on and follows. The report suggests that we're making progress, but there's still some work to do.
It is encouraging, though, to see how much collaboration is happening across the CDR industry. Scientists, entrepreneurs, policymakers, investors, all working together to make this market work effectively and ethically.
It's a huge task, but you can feel the momentum building. People are starting to understand how urgent the climate crisis is and the potential for CDR to be a real part of the solution.
Right. It's about moving beyond these small pilot projects and showing that CDR can really scale up to the point where it makes a real difference in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere.
And that means not only scaling up the technologies we have now, but also continuing to come up with new and better carbon removal solutions.
We need to explore every option, right? From things like planting trees and improving soil health to those more tech-heavy approaches like direct air capture and enhanced weathering.
Exactly. We need to get smarter about how we use these solutions, thinking about how they fit into larger systems, what other benefits they bring, and how sustainable they are in the long run.
I like what the report said about using the OVO products like biochar for soil health. It's a great way to make CDR more financially viable and appealing to a wider range of buyers.
It's a win-win. You're removing carbon and creating something valuable at the same time. It shows how important it is to be creative and work across different industries.
So looking ahead, what are some of the big things we should be watching for in the CDR market in 2025 and beyond?
Well, the release of that updated FBTI net zero standard is definitely a big one. If it includes strong targets for CDR purchases, it could create a huge surge in demand. It would tell companies that CDR isn't optional anymore, it's a necessity.
That would be a huge shift, wouldn't it?
I think so. Another thing to watch is the growing use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in CDR.
AI for carbon removal. That's interesting. I haven't heard much about that. How is it being used?
In lots of ways, AI can help design and operate CDR facilities more efficiently, analyze huge data sets to find the best locations for new projects, even help develop entirely new carbon removal technologies.
So it's like giving the whole CDR industry a boost.
Exactly, and that's what makes me optimistic about the future of CDR. The challenges are real, no doubt, but the creativity, the commitment, the sheer determination to solve this climate crisis, it's really inspiring.
Me too. It's amazing to see so many brilliant people working together to make this happen. And it's important for all of us to stay informed, keep asking questions, and support the people on the front lines of carbon removal.
Couldn't agree more. The future of CDR, and really the future of our planet, depends on it.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the world of CDR. And to our listener, we hope you found this journey through the CDR market insightful and maybe even a little bit exciting. There's a lot to be hopeful for. And we encourage you to keep learning, keep exploring, and think about how you can be part of creating a more sustainable future. Until next time, stay curious.